Over in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index declined 0.4% at 25,249. In mainland China, the Shanghai Composite Index finished up 0.3%, 2,603. US stocks fell on Tuesday as worries about the outlook for corporate earnings dampened sentiment. Though the three major indexes ended well off the day's lows as investors snapped up beaten down shares in late trading. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.5%. The S&P 500 lost 0.55% and the Nasdaq Composite Index dropped 0.42%. Let's take a look at the European markets and markets here at home. We're going to take a look at some of those numbers for you. The FTSE slipping by 1.2%, the CAC up 0.7%, and the DAX 1/3% higher. The all-share index down by 0.9%, industrials losing 1%, financials 0.5% firmer. The resources index down by 2.4%, the gold index falling 2.1%, the platinum index almost 2% weaker. Now gold is at $1,230 an ounce, platinum is at $829 an ounce. The Brent crude oil price is at $76 a barrel. The rand is trading firmer at 14.17 to the dollar, 18.28 to the pound, and 16 rand and 14 to the euro. Now, for more on the markets, I'm joined by Jamil Ahmad. He's the global head of currency strategy and market research at FXTM. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. We're waiting for the medium-term budget policy statement. We see the rand is doing quite well. How much of that has to do with the anticipation from the markets on that speech?
Well, actually, we're seeing a bit more calm in the global markets today following what has been a very precarious past 2 weeks where we've seen signs of both buying and selling momentum. Obviously, yesterday, as you pointed out, that was a massive sell-off in global markets. Some of that atmosphere has cooled so far on Wednesday, which is providing a little bit more inspiration for investors to take on risk. And when you have a better attitude towards taking on risk, it's better for emerging market assets. So this is where the South African rand stands to benefit. I would look at the medium-term budget as a near-term risk for the South African rand, could provide both upside and downside risks. However, over the longer term, there's a lot of external uncertainties around trade tensions, global market volatility, sensitivity to higher US interest rates, and this is what's going to dictate the action for emerging market currencies until the end of 2018 at least. Okay, let's look at another factor that also plays in South Africa here. The oil price coming down below $80 a barrel. We're seeing it's about $76. We're seeing that there's also the sanctions against Iran are still looming. Do we know why that oil price is dropping when people were expecting it to perhaps keep increasing towards $100? Well, actually what happened, as usual with investors, they've tried to price in news early. So we know we've got these looming Iranian sanctions that are set to take place within a couple of weeks. So this is why investors priced in the price of oil hitting 4-year highs, Brent crude and WTI, just a few weeks back. But over the past couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit of return of geopolitical and political risk, specifically within Saudi Arabia with the Turkey and the United States situation when it comes to the disappearance of the Saudi journalist. And the original comment from Saudi Arabia was that if there were any risk on their economy or the prospect of sanctions or any kind of repercussions, they could look at weaponizing oil, which is why investors really priced in that oil could go even higher than $200. However, as the Saudi investment conference has kicked off, the rhetoric now and the narrative is that no, we will not be doing this, and we still want to support the oil markets as a strategic partner. And this is why investors have sold oil on top of the overall market volatility. Again, if you don't have risk appetite in the markets, you don't have that much attraction towards the oil markets as well, which is a leading factor behind why the oil market slipped by 5% yesterday during trading. Let's stay with Saudi Arabia and that conference that just took place. We saw about $55 billion in deals pledged on the first day, despite that blowback from the death of the journalist and the factors around that. Firstly, are we going to see any more blowback towards them, and what effect will that have on the oil price? And then perhaps later we'll speak about our investment summit that's coming up. Sure. So generally, this is a political and diplomatic issue, so it shouldn't have that much of an impact on the financial markets as it has had. But because we've had a lot of political risk, you know, the risk of populism in Europe, United States, this is why investors are looking at this kind of reaction more sharply than what you would have maybe 1 year or 2 years ago. Generally speaking, as long as there's no real economic implications on Saudi Arabia, and as long as there's no real conflict that arises from this, I don't know how much more the financial markets can react to the narrative. perspective, because we've seen the headlines, they've circled around this stuff for nearly 2 weeks. Of course, it will be an ongoing theme when it comes to diplomatic and political issues. However, financial markets at some point will probably stand back from the situation as long as it doesn't escalate in tensions any further than what we've already seen.
Okay, South Africa is holding the investment conference from Friday at the Sandton Convention Centre. What are we expecting there, and how much weight can we expect? And I know it's not fair to ask how much do you think we can bring in. The president's looking to raise $1.2 trillion in the next 5 years. Will this conference go towards boosting confidence and getting more investors into South Africa?
Well, if the conference is able to be successful as what's projected, of course, this would be positive for market sentiment and be positive for consumer sentiment. And at a time where the economy is in a technical recession, raising the hope of consumers is something that's key towards driving that economy back to where it should be performing. But we can't really compare the Saudi Arabian Investment Conference, which is deemed as like the Davos in the desert. That's a major conference on an international level, and we can't really compare that to what is a more domestic and regional conference that's going to take place in South Africa over the coming days.
Mm-hmm. With these geopolitical issues that we've spoken about and some that we haven't spoken about, like the China-US trade war, the ructions in Saudi Arabia, looming Iran sanctions, how protected is South Africa and other emerging markets against factors that we've got no control over?
That's completely right. These are factors that are not domestic, and they are external uncertainties, and there's a number of different external uncertainties, and you touched on just a couple of them. This overall means that when it comes to South Africa as an emerging market, that you could have less attraction towards risk, and those external uncertainties is a leading factor behind the weakness in the South African rand in 2018. If you look at the overall performance of emerging market currencies, only the Mexican peso has actually gained against the US dollar this year. Apart from that, it's been red across the board when it comes to the US dollar strengthening against all emerging market currencies. And it is because of such uncertain political risk, a lot of external uncertainties, and until these uncertainties really get removed from the atmosphere, the market sentiment is going to remain cautious, and that's because investors are concerned. The trade tensions with the United States and China, as an example, represents the largest risk to the global economy since the global financial crisis a decade ago. So you really can't underestimate these risks and what impact it could have on global growth.
Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. It's time for a short break. I'll have more business news for you and what to expect from the midterm budget just after that. Do stay with us.